Today we're going to be talking about 5 big tips for content marketing creators. So in terms of the big tips for content marketing creators, let's get into those. So tip number 1, get to know your audience. Get to know your audience. One of the things that's going to come up in a couple of these tips is that content marketing is not about you. And like we have this egoic thing, this thing from our ego where we're constantly focused, and this is like the inner critic part of us, right? Constantly focus on, am I doing a good job? Am I good enough? Am I qualified for this? Am I interesting? Will people even care what I have to say? And that all reflects an internal focus, like a focus on yourself as opposed to a focus on your audience. And the more that you can focus on your audience, the more that you can focus on serving their needs, which only comes when you get to know your audience, the more success you can have with content marketing. So, for example, this particular episode is based on me putting out a question inspired by the work of Dr. Glenn Livingston and Ryan Levesque, who took Dr. Livingston's work further. And specifically, this is inspired by me asking what they call the single most important question. And that is basically, what is your single most important question or challenge right now regarding marketing? And I ask that question when you go to breakthroughmarketingsecrets.com/ask. And what that does is it gives me constant feedback from my audience about what people care about, what people are interested in, what people want to know about. And I'm able to answer that question on a very regular basis, even in my dailies where I'm not directly responding to to somebody submitting a question. I am often responding to topics that people bring up in there. You can also pay attention to comments and feedback. You have to be a little bit careful because who knows who that is that's actually commenting. But if you have consistent commenters, especially that are asking for specific topics or that are asking specific questions, it can help you really understand what people are asking for in your market. Another thing that that I know works and that I've seen work multiple times before is for if your business has a sales team or inbound calls or inbound customer service emails, all the questions that people are consistently asking there, those are buyer questions. And those are things that people want to know about. And so if you're constantly creating content around those questions and answering those questions, again, you're talking about what people care about and what people are interested in. And that comes from getting to know your audience. So any kind of engagement that people, like if you have, for example, last Friday, I put out a video called "Why Do So Many Copywriters Not Hit Six Figures?" or title was similar to that. And that was one of my most popular videos recently. Well, I know that based on the engagement, that's a topic that people really care about, right? I've been doing this long enough and I have enough repetitions that I already knew that was going to be a topic that people cared about. And I'm not always beating up the same topic because people tend to care less about it when it's the same thing over and over and over and over again. But when you pay attention to engagement, what people click on, what people share, what people like, all of that, it tells you what is interesting to your audience, regardless of that inner critic that you have going on. So remember, the content is not for you. You get to know your audience and you're creating the content for your audience. And then you're letting them tell you what is interesting and what is not. Next up, tip number 2, big tip number 2, allow yourself to be interested and inspired. Interested in and inspired by topics. And when you get interested in and inspired by topics, when you get excited about something, share that excitement. Oftentimes, the best content that's put out there, especially when it's in some kind of how-to space, is content where it's people kind of discovering things and sharing things that actually got them inspired and interested. Now, the reason that I specifically use the interested term is because recently I'm diagnosed with ADHD. And it's the inattentive subtype, which means that even though my body, in these videos, my body kind of bounces all over the place. But most of the time, my body sits still, but my mind is everywhere, right? And that's what ADHD inattentive subtype means. So I follow a lot of research on ADHD and I read a lot about ADHD. And one of the things that I heard recently that really resonated with me is that people who have ADHD have an interest-based nervous system, which means that they go after things that are interesting to them. So this explains fairly well why when I was interested in classes in school, I would do very well. I would do very well in classes that I was interested in, but it was consistently a struggle for me if I was not interested in a class to actually be able to engage with it and do well in the class. Even if it was a topic and a subject that I could totally like knock out of the park, if I wasn't interested, I just wouldn't put in the effort. So you have to allow yourself to be interested in things, especially at the risk of like overstepping my ability to diagnose everybody. It feels like with all of the media inputs and everything that we have now these days, that more and more people behave like ADHD. They behave like they have an ADHD type attention span, and people are constantly being bombarded with things that are interesting to them and that curate this sense of just chasing what is most interesting. They're being fed by algorithms with things that they're going to click on because they have a history of clicking on them, which means that they're just being given their interests over and over again. And so people respond to things that they're interested in, and it goes back to this classic lesson of you want to be interesting. Like in conversation, you want to be interesting, be interested in the other person, right? And there is also this corollary to that if you share what you are most interested in, you're not going to resonate with everybody, but the people who you resonate with, by sharing your passion, by sharing your excitement, people are going to be more predisposed to being interested in what you're talking about. And the one thing that I will say, just specifically responding to the question from Alexandra about, how do you plan your content? This content is not always planned. It is responsive to both internal and external priorities. So, for example, this Mailbox Monday episode is responsive to an external question that came in. Other times, it's responsive to an internal promotion that I have going on. Other times, it's just whatever the heck I feel like I can be excited about today to put out an episode for you. And so whatever you are interested in and inspired by is something that is worth creating content around. And sometimes what it takes, like I'm constantly writing down different ideas or keeping track of different ideas that I might want to cover in an upcoming episode of Breakthrough Marketing Secrets. And it's only in the moment where I'm actually sitting down to publish where I say, okay, this one is the perfect combination of external input, like internal priorities, and what I'm inspired by today. Okay, so next up, specifically responding to a list or overview I can look at every time I create content that reminds me of the most important things I need to remember to make an impact on my prospects. I basically every day use the hook, story, offer format. Meaning I do something at the beginning to hook your attention, to get you interested, to make sure that you as the audience recognize that there is a benefit for you and that establishes a little bit of credibility, a little bit of curiosity. Credibility is important too, but curiosity around what's going to be covered. So that's my ABC headline formula: attention, benefit, curiosity, attention, benefit, curiosity. So in the beginning, we are hooking people's attention. We are getting them to understand that there is a benefit to engaging with what we're going to cover, and we're establishing some kind of curiosity that's going to keep them engaged as far as possible through the content. And then in the story portion of the content, sometimes it is story-based. Sometimes I'm actually telling a story. Oftentimes it's what I call like micro stories throughout, meaning that there are a lot of little story elements, but it's not always some big story arc. But the story is like the main body of the content of these daily episodes. So these 5 big tips for content marketing creators is the story today. The 5 tips are the story. And sometimes, like I said, like that, it involves more of a selling story type situation like I teach in the Story Selling Masterclass. But the story, what you want to do is you want to build it in digestible chunks. So 5 tips is great because it's digestible chunks. The whole point of doing like a list or something like that is to make it easy to consume, make it easy if you're taking notes, make it easy for you to engage with the content and recognize that we are moving along. Speaking of moving along, the offer portion of hook, story, offer, you want to give them an action to take. It's not always an offer explicitly that you're making, especially if your content is consistent, but give them a next step to take, give them a next action to take. And oftentimes that will include, hey, click through to this for this benefit. Now, this one is really important because oftentimes this feeling of what I'm writing is boring or not interesting, even though you know a lot of stuff, that often comes just from our inner critic. And the way that our inner critic is silenced is through repetition. And so put in the reps is tip number 4. Just keep creating the content, do it a lot. The point is to find yourself, to find your voice. It's okay to get repetitive with different topics, different ideas. Always your goal is to approach them in a new way. That's where stories or responding to why something was interesting to you today, why something was inspiring to you today can be valuable. Because like this is something I learned from Dan Kennedy. He teaches like the same 10 concepts over and over again, and he has for decades of his career as a marketer. What happens is every time that he creates new content around one of those 10 ideas, he finds a way to be responsive to what's going on in the moment in his own business, in his own work, or in the broader culture. And by speaking to what's going on in the moment, it provides a new introduction into that particular piece of content. And the way that you figure that out, the way that you get good at that is just by putting in the reps and doing it a lot. And you will find your voice, you'll find how this works for you. And you will also find as you do this, that something that you thought was completely like uninteresting or boring is going to be the thing that super resonates with your audience. And something that you thought was like the best thing in the world. And this happens to me a lot. And I'm like, why are you not listening to me? Something you think was the best thing in the world, people just respond with, nothing. You just get no response from the thing that you're most excited about. And the only way that you figure that out is you put in the reps. And then finally, tip number 5, fifth big tip for content marketing creators is to be curious. Now, I said be curious. My first approach at this 5th tip was accept failure. And that kind of speaks to that thing that I was just saying about you're going to try things that you're in love with and people are not going to love it. Part of being curious is to accept failure. But being curious is a stronger position to take because it just acknowledges that you don't know what works. And so you're going to be curious about what people are interested in, how people respond. Not everything is going to be perfect out of the gate. You're going to try again and again. And if you adopt this attitude of curiosity that says, like, what are people interested in? What are people responding to? It's going to go all the way back to the beginning to getting to know your audience better. And you're just going to keep getting better and better as you go. And so being curious will just continue to feed your ability to put out great content in the end. So really quickly recapping the 5 tips. Number 1, get to know your audience. Number 2, allow yourself to be inspired or interested. Number 3 is hook, story, offer as the general structure for how I'm putting these things out. Number 4 is put in the reps, do it a lot. Number 5 is be curious.